Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is Yukitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. This is another episode of the making of for my Empire Total War Let's Play. This one's going to be a little bit different than last time. I've heard some people saying that they tried to play this game and had some difficulties. So I'm just going to talk a little about how to play battles, which helps me get to where I am in this current Let's Play, which is in a very dominating position fairly easily. Again, I am playing this on hard/hard difficulty, but I have beaten it on very hard/very hard difficulty, so if you're playing on either of those difficulties, this can apply to your situation. Obviously, if you're having some difficulties with the basics, you should probably play the game on an easier setting, but if you want to just sort of challenge yourself right off the bat, this will still apply, as you can see. The most basic thing in this game is that you're going to want to just make a very straight, simple line at the start of the game and throughout most of the game. That's pretty much the most basic information I can give you, and it's what you are going to sort of want to learn how to do effectively. What a lot of people are very used to in other Total War or other RTS sort of games is to take your units and sort of right-click on enemy units to either focus fire them or to command attack them, and I tend to see some newer players doing this. I also tend to see some players not really understanding just how important it is to have a very wide straight line. It seems sort of boring, and it can be, which is why at later levels you want to be doing things like I've done, which is peel off a couple of units to put them in front to guard my artillery. This let me deploy my artillery forward rather than behind my infantry line. Basically, you want to do this sort of long, straight, static line because it provides a large amount of fire. Units that are moving can't shoot in this game. They have to be in line and prepared. There are some exceptions to that where you're using an attack order and they'll sort of do poor fire against them, but you won't get any good volley fire. So at the early game, as you can see here, I've got this nice big straight line, and that will help you out throughout much of the game. Especially early on when your only real infantry is line infantry and you've got no real artillery support during that portion of the game. After you've got some other artillery options, or if you're playing specific factions, like say the Austrians, you can use other tactics. But for now, stick to the basics and just make a nice big straight line of line infantry. What you're going to need to learn sort of after that is when to flank and how to properly flank. And that will come up a little bit later in this video. It's a very important part of winning games in the harder difficulties. You can typically win in normal or easy just by having your straight line walk straight up to just about firing range with the enemy, and you'll do okay. They'll just trade shots and typically you'll come out slightly ahead. Or where you don't come out ahead, you can sort of kind of hope for the best, basically, because the AI doesn't make very intelligent decisions in this game. So you can generally get away with that up until I find normal, where you're outnumbered. If you're outnumbered and playing a normal match, you're going to have to learn how to move your units to block and flank. And for that, you want to, again, avoid using those attack commands. You don't want to right-click on enemy units. What you instead want to do is reform your line and reform individual units in your line. For that, using hotkeys for groups is sometimes important. In this case, I swap out from my normal mode, which is just everyone in loose everyone in freeform formation, and I switch them into two hotkey groups. One is the line infantry followed directly by, or one is the light infantry followed directly by my main line. Then I've kept two free-floating units of line infantry as blockers. And figuring out sort of what you need for your main straight line and what you can move around for the enemy's flanks is a pretty crucial skill. Basically what you want to do is make sure that each of your enemy units is tied up directly in front with one of your units. Any units that are remaining can go around and flank. That is basically the best way to think about it. Here I'm attempting to wipe out my enemy's artillery, which has moved out to an exposed flank, but he counters with the cavalry maneuver. I'm going to try and run my cavalry back closer to my infantry support, but I do want to take out his cavalry with mine. I know that I can probably beat those two units with an infantry unit that's been pressed forward, and because I'm using 2 regiments of horse, whereas one of his is light shooting cav, so those units are quite weak in melee. And that cavalry action on the flank has disrupted his formation, since now he wants to reinforce his left flank to stop my cavalry from rolling through it into his artillery. But to stop that from happening, I'm going to move up my light infantry. This is going to allow me to fire along his front without him being able to retaliate, since I have superior range, and that's the nice thing about light infantry. They've got 90 range or 120 range depending on what type you have, compared to the 70 range of your typical line infantry, if I recall the numbers correctly. And this means that if your enemy is standing outside of your range, you can advance just a little bit and you'll get shots off against him that he can't return. This means that if he's forced to move forward against you, your line infantry will be the ones getting to shoot at him. So that's always an advantage. You want your troops to be stationary while his are moving towards you. If you can do that, you're usually going to win the firefight, and that's another reason why it's important to keep your line straight. Here you can see one of my regiments of horses decided to rout. I kind of expected that. I threw my cavalry in there knowing that I would lose one or both of my cavalry units. I just wanted to knock some of his out of the fight because his cavalry was fairly dominating compared to mine, and I wanted to make sure that they were away from my artillery. The cavalry on his other flank is less of a concern. Here I'm retreating back my light infantry, the reason being that they're fairly expensive and come in small units. So it's important to keep them out of the direct line of fire. If you're in range of light line infantry, with your light infantry, they'll lose. That's just basically how it is because of the numbers and the reload difference. Light infantry use rifles, which take much longer to reload, and therefore they usually lose out in direct firefights, even though they have better accuracy. Here you can see what I was talking about earlier. This is me moving up my flank. You can see I selected at the border of where my line was sort of matched up to his, and every other unit that wasn't matched up to his is moving up to the flank. They didn't have anyone to fight anyway, so they can move around the side. Over here, I've sort of cleaned up his cavalry, so I'm going to reform my line on that side and try and flank from there as well, since those units are now free. Without any cavalry on that side, I don't have to worry about any sort of cavalry threats attacking my artillery. It's important always to keep your artillery protected, not just because it's a great way to force your enemy to close towards you. If I have more artillery than my opponent, usually that means my opponent has to move his troops forward, which is again an advantage. You always want to be the static force in Empire Total War. And it's a little bit counterintuitive. A lot of people are used to being the one with the momentum is the one that wins. To a certain degree that's true in Empire, but to a certain degree you want to be the static force. Like, it's okay if you move your force straight up just outside a gunshot range of your opponent and then force them forward those last few inches. That would be a great idea. But if you also just camp on top of a hill, it's actually ridiculously strong in this game, and a lot of people don't like hill campers in multiplayer, but honestly I don't play very much multiplayer. This matchmaking is pretty horrible. Again, you can see me applying that sort of principle of flanking maneuver, just moving troops up into a line along the flank. And when you're moving your troops on the flank, you want to still use that line principle. Keep them in straight line, don't use attack orders. Just move them into a big straight line that's flanking alongside the enemies. Here I'm trying to move sort of forward all of my remaining troops just so that I'm getting the maximum amount of firepower into the enemy possible, which is basically why you flank and why you want to have a long straight line. It's to maximize firepower. At the same time, I'm just charging in with my cavalry to finish off his artillery. Cavalry in this game is different from cavalry in other Total War games. It can't be used as shock troops. It cannot really be used to break through a decisive battle. It's almost entirely used to sort of disrupt an enemy before they're forming up, to rear charge anybody that's in melee, or to chase down fleeing units, and of course to spike artillery. It is really bad in a straight up fight against line infantry, which is the main infantry force in this game, so you don't want to throw your cavalry away against those sorts of fights. Here my enemy has sort of broken, and it's pretty easy to see why. I've got them encircled pretty tightly by my troops. I've got cavalry running around behind them, which is a morale detriment, and you can see I'm starting to chase them down with my cavalry. And basically this is one of the advantages of having a wider line. If you've got a narrow line, it's harder to move your troops out along the flanks since you'll have less of their frontage engaged. But since I had such a wide line, it was just a simple matter of choosing pivot points, turning them in slightly. And that will be the end of this video. I hope it was informative, and I hope you'll tune in again. Thanks for watching.